All right, everybody, thank you so much for joining. Today we have Stacy High-Brinkley. She is one of the provisional assessors and works for Cask. And really excited about talking about the asset management domain and talking through specifically one of the level 3 practices. So nevertheless, Stacy, tell me a little bit about yourself and what you were doing before Cask and what has basically prepared you for your role now and obviously being an assessor.
Well, what I did before Cask was a lot of network security, building networks and that for Northrop Grumman, for TRW, and I actually was network administration in the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Worked with firewalls and technical controls back then. But back in the day, we didn't have to worry too much about security because we knew where our assets were. It was before everything kind of got into the Internet of Things. So that was in the 80s and 90s. But now I'm here at Cask and excited to continue doing assessments and now CMMC assessments.
Yeah. So what have you been up to, obviously, up until the era of CMMC back in late 2019? What have you been up to as far as assessments are concerned? And what types of organizations have you been doing assessments for? Kind of flavor that for me.
Yeah, so we've been doing assessments for DoD. We've been doing them for the Navy. I'm an NQV3. I'm also a Marine Corps validator. We've been doing a lot of assessments, validations since 2002 for them. And so that has been a lot of our bread and butter, a lot of RMF programs across DoD as a contractor. So we have been in that arena for quite some time. So now we're ready to turn around to the contractors and dish out what we've been dishing to DoD.
Yeah, absolutely. I could definitely see the parallel. Obviously, there's a lot of requirements that parlay into CMMC and are based on or practices are based on RMF, NIST, and some of these other frameworks.
Right.
So tell me a little bit about the assessment training that you went through and some of the takeaways.
Yeah, so I was in the first group and it was really fun. I was actually on the working group also for the assessment methodology since that's what I've been doing for the last 20 years. So it was really a great training. We had 1 day virtual, 3 day on, a lot of good conversation back and forth with all the other provisional assessors. And the knowledge base was incredible. I wish we had had more time. Now they have 4 days. We only had 3. But it was great training. I'm looking forward to training some more. I'm just signing up myself and some folks to start the formal training in January. So
wonderful.
It was really good information. They did a great job.
Good. That's good to hear. I mean, that's pretty much been what I've heard from others. And especially in the first group, you got to work out all the kinks.
Yeah.
And sounds like they've made a lot of progress. And obviously that's with all of this. Continual improvement, even on the assessment side and all the training pieces. There's a lot of moving parts, a lot of lessons learned, new ground covered, as well as obviously you can tap into previous frameworks and previous assessment methodologies and more or less programs for lessons learned. But still, we're doing a lot of new things.
Yes, that's true.
So let's talk about asset management and that domain. If you could, maybe let's start with talking about that domain as a whole, and where do you see organizations, even not commercial aerospace and defense companies, but just other organizations struggling with that domain and struggling with the practices that make up asset management?
So I think when people think asset management, they think things, but asset management is people, process, and technologies, right? You've got to make sure you have everything under control: hardware, software, your people, your documents, your processes, your policies for all of those things. If you don't know your hardware, software, if you don't know your assets, how in the world are you going to protect them? Right. I have a laptop sitting out on my front yard and I don't know about it. Someone's going to come take it. So that's the important thing about the asset management domain. And it is one of the Delta 20s. So out of the 130 of the level 3 controls, the practices, 110 of the NIST controls are in there. but the asset management is one of the Delta 20s that we're hoping will be in the DFARS final rules to make up 130 of CMMC. So the asset management practice is, in my mind, one of the most important, because right off the bat, if you don't know your accreditation boundary or your hardware and software and everything that goes with that, you're going to not be able to secure your environment in the proper way to protect.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting point with the accreditation boundary. When you go to assess a business, is that more or less where you're starting? Let's define exactly what, where CUI is living as far as people, places, things. Is that more or less where you're starting?
Right. So where we start when we first start off with the assessment is first the stakeholders, right? Who does what? That's one of the most important things to get down. Then what you want to do is find out what level they need to be certified at, level 1, level 3. And then you go in and you have them scope out their environment, what they think is their area where they hold either the FCI data or both FCI and CUI data if they're going for level 3. So some folks might think it's their whole entire network, and it's not. They can VLAN that off and they can work in one little area with CUI data. So a lot of folks are getting confused. They think they need to have their whole corporation ML3, and they need to be NIST compliant, right? If they're working the DoD, so they do need to have those 110 controls. But for CMMC, there are some things that you don't need if you aren't holding CUI data for level 3. But the scoping is the most important part, making sure the stakeholders, CMMC, the C3PAO work closely together to make sure that's scoped out properly for a lot of reasons, right? Because you're going to price this out, and we don't want to be pricing ourselves out of the market. It's not a gouging thing for us. It's my passion. I've been doing it for so many years. I'm trying to help people just like I do in DoD.
Right. And you bring up an interesting point with, whether or not you move your entire company to a particular environment, or you try to secure the entire environment across the entire enterprise. I guess it really just boils down to what is going to be fiscally and risk responsible. It may not make sense to secure the entire environment to the entire level 3 practices, but sometimes it might, just depending on what, from a cost standpoint, and how much of your portfolio is working with the DoD, how much of your user base is touching CUI, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a really good point. So let's get into the level 3 practice itself. So we have AM 3.036, define procedures for handling of CUI data. I know we've kind of already talked about a little bit of what you need to do to prepare for this practice. Maybe expound a little bit specifically when it comes to a level 3 organization and defining procedures. How should a company be addressing this, approaching it, and where do you see some hurdles for some of the businesses you've worked with?
So the first hurdle is making sure you have control of all your assets. We're seeing people, they don't realize that their mobile devices their folks have out there are their assets, that their printers, that their fax machines, that anything that has an IP, anything that could be unsecure their area is their asset. And the most important thing is, and if you go back to the 853, which we use when we assess DoDs, you've got your media protection policies, you've got your physical policies, right? You've got your SC domain. All of these track over into the asset management domain. So asset management is just actually covering everything. And for CUI data specifically, so any asset that has CUI on it, a lot of folks are having issues with not only labeling the assets that have CUI, but knowing what CUI is, right? They're like, I don't know what CUI is. So that's why we point so many people to the CUI registry so they can look at all the different groups and exact, technical drawings and things like that, and data they have maybe that we won't have from CMMC, but we do in the DoD. We have test results, we have scans and SCAPs and STIGs, that CUI data. But But in the CMMC, that's a whole nother point. We're not to take anything away. We're not to have anything on our systems, right? But for them, it's a big reach sometimes to find out where all their assets are, especially when they didn't start that way, when they started implementing their security backward, right? It wasn't baked in the beginning. And that's where we're finding a lot of issues.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. They specifically call out data categorization in the description for that practice if you read through. And I think that is a big hurdle for many companies, understanding what CUI they have, what is their responsibility as it becomes to categorization and labeling, and as well as tracking. You know, one other piece is disposal. Have you seen, can I speak through that, best practices and where you see certain organizations kind of falling short of that?
Yeah, so that's a big thing, right? Because a lot of people have a refresh policy of about 3 years for their laptops and things like that. Most of their mobile device policies are a little bit easier because they'll wipe those and send those back or get those back into a Best Buy or something. But for laptops and things that have ever held CUI data, that's a whole different ballgame. It has to be wiped properly per requirements. It has to be documented. It has to go through a certain process and procedure, and that has to be documented and followed through correctly. So you can't just say, hey, here's our policy, and then you look down and you find out it was some other policies from some other company that somebody gave somebody to give to you so you could be compliant. So that's something that you have to be very careful with. I think folks are thinking it's a paper drill. It's not. It's not a paper drill. It's a real drill to see if you are securing your assets and you're saying what you're doing honestly. And that's what we're going to find out when we go in and assess this practice.
Okay. You said something interesting there. When you talk about going into an organization and seeing if they're managing their assets properly and they're categorizing and labeling data, documents, as well as endpoints, are you going to be looking at every single laptop, or is it one of those things that you're going to look at examples and spot checks and things of that nature?
No, we're looking at everything. We actually have a different way of doing things in DoD if they're using secured images and things like on a LAN that has 5,000 laptops, right? I look at like 10%, right? 500, whatever. But for CMMC, we're looking at everything in their scope, everything that they've scoped out, that they've said is in their boundary for CMMC. That's our due diligence, right? I mean, you could have one rogue device that someone put in there, or that someone brought in you didn't even know, and it can be an attack vector for your whole entire corporation, and there, boop, your critical data is gone. So, right. And that's a whole nother thing, right? Critical data, CUI data, you need to know where that is and know where that's protected at all times.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for elaborating on that. That was really helpful. I more or less think we have covered that practice relatively well. Obviously, we could probably talk about 2 hours. But nevertheless, is there anything else you want to add to that particular practice in that domain?
No, I just think it's one of the most important ones, to be honest with you. Even if you look on the CIS controls, the hardware, software, asset management is right up there in the top. Yeah. So that's a big attack vector. I mean, it's very important.
Well, one thing that we haven't touched on is what you're doing at Cask today, and how can organizations work with you all as they're starting to get ready for their assessment? Is there anything that you all are doing if they reach out to Cask, if they reach out to you, how you're prepping them for their assessment, what that communication string looks like, and then also too, how can they work with Cask to get their assessment completed? And anything else you want to add?
Yeah, so we started right after I got certified. I had folks even before I got certified, provisional assessor, that wanted to do pre-assessments and gap analysis. And we got rolling right away. A matter of fact, we've done a lot of NIST reporting, helping people report for the DFARS interim rule that just became effective on Monday.
Yes, in SBRS.
Yep. So we've helped people walk through that because a lot of people were confused. Should they email? Should they go up and report. How do they report? Okay, here's my 110. It's like, you really have to be honest there. So we did a bunch of NIST. We have a great tool. We're partnering with a company, and we have a great GRC cloud tool. It doesn't hold any data.
Oh, great.
It's
great.
just
Okay,
a
there
tool,
you go.
right? A tracking tool. But so we have the NIST compliance assessments we're doing. We're doing the CMMC pre-assessments. I have 6 going on right now. And we're doing gap analysis. So the pre-assessments are for the folks that are like, what is CMMC? Oh my gosh, please help us. So we're actually really going through a full assessment. It's just a pre-assessment because full assessments we're not ready to do those yet. Or we haven't given the green flag.
Authorized, yeah.
So then the gap analysis are for those folks that like, look, we reported up, we're 85 and we've just got a poem for our multi-factor authentication and MDM stuff. And we're good to go. But can you tell us what we need for CMMC? And that's where they're hitting the processes, procedures, documentation, the 2 pieces of objective evidence, no POAM, all the big differences, right, between CMMC and NIST. And then we're lining people up for assessments. I have 6. And once the marketplace opens for C3PAOs, they'll go in and they'll choose will be a C3PAO. They'll go in there and hopefully choose us. And then we will start the assessments as soon as we can. But the big thing is the folks are getting ready and they're very thankful. It's a lot of fun. It's something I love doing. My folks love doing. And I've got new people getting into cyber that are learning it and doing great. So it's exciting for everybody, from people that have been in the field for 25 years or more and people that are just coming into the field. That we're all trying to secure it together. It's just really exciting time, I think.
Yeah, I agree. It's new challenges, new frontiers, especially with this industry on the commercial side, and exciting nevertheless. So we're happy that you could join us. This talk was very encouraging as well as enlightening, specifically to the domain that we're covering today. But really, thanks for just highlighting all of the things that are going on with the training, with your experiences there, as well as covering the domain, and then even to how the assessment process is going to happen and how folks can work with Cask moving forward. So thank you again, and excited to hear where things go and possibly checking back in with you in a couple months after we have many new assessments under your belt.
Yep, that sounds great. I look forward to it.
Awesome. Thank you.